We're on Shalom Uvracha. Shalom, shalom. How is everyone doing? Welcome. My name is Rabbi Jesse Mordechai Charan, and we are in the incredible Sunrise Sanctuary here at Temple Beth David, located in Metro Atlanta. We are a URJ-affiliated congregation, and we have a special guest. Again, today is, I got to look at my watch, the 21st. We're in the month of ER. I can't believe time is going by so quickly. It's incredible. And today, Heint is Mittwoch. It's Wednesday. We're transitioning soon into Shabbos. And we have a special guest, a Sofer. Rav Asa is here. We're going to be putting on new Eitzei Chayim. So the rabbi here, the Sofer, the Stam, this acronym that we talk about for Sefer Torah, for mezuzah, for tefillin or tefillin mezuzah, writing the parchment. So the rabbi will introduce himself and share with us really what he's doing to disconnect, to remove the parchment from the previous scrolls and now transitioning to the new scrolls. So we have, again, we're interactive, we're live. You don't have to look at the camera. Everything's here on the table. If you're watching and you're on YouTube, please let us know you have questions, you have comments. We have incredible people. We have some of our members here that are going to ask questions. It's interactive. We're learning. We're not just watching the rabbi work. Of course, we're watching the rabbi work, but we also want to be engaged. So without further ado, shalom, our friend, our chaver, Rav Asa is with us in the sanctuary.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here with everyone and to take the opportunity to be able to work on the Torah, to switch out the Eitzei Chayim, the what's called in English the mantles that we pick up the Torah with and we hold the Torah by. It's in terms of the work. It's really the minor part of the whole process of changing out the Eitzei Chayim. Writing it obviously is a much bigger task that's involved. Really, there's only one material that's used to attach the Eitzei Chayim, and that is actually gid. It's the sinew that comes from a kosher animal. And as you may be able to see, this particular one has 5 holes. I don't know if we'll use all 5. Probably just 1, 3, and 5, and we'll use those to attach the actual scroll to the parchment, the scroll to the Eitzei Chayim, and then I will probably just use some parchment to reinforce it a little bit so that it gives it a little bit more strength. There's really nothing specific in Jewish tradition about how a Torah Eitzei Chayim has to be built. Traditionally they're wood, but there are others that today are not necessarily made out of wood. This one is beautiful, decorated. It has, if you may see, a silver little mini crown at the top. And the right-hand side has actually what's called sort of a riser, that because the two Eitzei Chayim will sort of meet each other as follows when it's closed. So in order that the scroll will not slide down one side more than the other, and this makes it a little bit more even, they put these, they build these onto the Eitzei Chayim. I'm going to start, but if there's any questions along the way, please feel free to ask. I'm more than happy to address anything. I'm going to use a little something to hold the Torah, the Eitzei Chayim, so it doesn't roll. We call that making sure we have a safer Torah.
We definitely. That's right. So when we think about the Torah, we know that we have specific halachas, Jewish law about how to write the Torah. So, Rabbi, is there any brachas? We know that before someone's writing a Torah, they want to have kavanah, they want to say a specific bracha when they're writing. But when you're transitioning from the mantle to the other Eitzei Chayim, is there any brachas that you say?
Thank you. Yeah. There's no specific bracha that is said, but obviously the intent is that we're doing it for the purpose of the Torah. I'm just going to roll it here a little bit. Yeah. Let's go ahead. If you want to grab that hand, I think we're almost at the end anyway. There we are. Okay. So here we have 1, 3, and 5 connections. Beginning with Bereshit, the Genesis. Whoops. I'm sorry. Thank you. Oh, okay, great. This particular Torah has a stamp on the back that it was, I'm not sure exactly all the details, but it shows that it was checked and a few other details about it. So the first thing I'm going to do is just remove the old sinew that is on here.
Now, why is it important when we think about here? The rabbi says that it was important that it was checked. So why should someone check a Sefer Torah?
Make sure it's kosher.
And now what is it? You say make sure it's kosher. So what does it mean that a Sefer Torah is kosher? What do you have some examples? So what would invalidate? So we talk about, there's this word to make it pasul, to invalidate a Sefer Torah. Rabbi, can you give us an example of what would invalidate a Sefer Torah if it's not kosher?
Sure. So there's really two types of things that would invalidate the Torah, assuming that that it was written by a person who knows what they were doing. So the first problem may be of the way it was written initially, i.e. that a letter or a word was left out, or an extra letter or word was put in, which obviously, you're talking about 300,000 plus letters. Mistakes could happen. And actually, all new Torah scrolls that are written today are scanned for any type of errors like that. And inevitably, you find a few errors, and then the Torah can be corrected at that point. Additionally, you could have issues with time where, because it is ink and parchment, things can either, you could get holes in the parchment, you could get letters that are no longer intact, and then they would need to be fixed as well. So those would be the type of things that would invalidate. Let's just put that there for a second. Over here. Okay.
Now with the old scroll, with the old Sofer, does that need to be buried, just like you would bury?
If it's not going to be reused, it should actually be buried. Yes, that is correct. Anything that had been used for a for a holy purpose, if it is no longer in use, then it would be buried.
Now, we see here that the ink here, right, when we look at the Sefer Torah, and many of you have seen them, you'll see black ink. Rabbi, what if we wanted a Sofer to write a Sefer Torah in a different color ink? Can you give us, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so, oops. These masks are...
Yeah.
Let me just thank you. So one of the many laws pertaining to the Torah is that it has to be written with black ink, and there's not really anywhere in the world you would go, you would see that consistency. There's never a Torah, as far as I know, that would be written in any other type of any other color of ink.
Is there a reason why?
The answer is yes. The answer is not always so easy to reason why, but to know the reason why. But yeah, there's always a reason why it is done. But I don't necessarily have the answer.
Is for the ink, not to continue with the ink, but just if we're gonna go, if the Sofer says, Rabbi, I ran out of ink, and I say that's okay, I'll go to the Kinko's down the road and pick up ink. Can I find Sefer Torah ink at the local store?
That is an interesting question. So it's actually not such a simple question. The main requirement of the ink is that it not come from any non-kosher source. But there is a discussion whether there's specific ingredients it needs to contain or not. And the general custom is that we follow the more stringent approach to use a very specific ink made from certain organic materials.
And then when you write it, also if I'm at the local store, can I get a good Bic pen to write a Sefer Torah? What type of instrument is used when writing a Sefer Torah? So we have here, you have to, Rabbi, I'm an expert on other things, but we have Rabbi Asa here who's the expert on the Sefer Torah. So the question from our crowd was, is this calligraphy?
Yeah, so it is a type of calligraphy. in a sense that it's a very specific, each of the letters are written in a very specific way, and the quill that is traditionally used is somewhat like a calligraphy pen. That being said, it's a bit of a mistake that it specifically has to be written with a feather. There were traditionally scribes that wrote with a reed. And even today, there may be scribes that would use some other material. The main thing is really the ink that is used, and not so much the writing instrument. But if you would try to use, a regular pen, you would not be able to get the same effect of what you're writing.
Now, when you write calligraphy with a pen, sometimes it has, I think, right, a metal edge. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
So can metal be used, Rabbi? Can we use metal when we're writing a Sefer Torah?
So the short answer is, even though it would seem there would be reasons not to do it, but the authorities have actually said that, technically speaking, even though it's not the custom, technically speaking, there would be nothing that would invalidate it if you would use metal. Interestingly enough.
Very good. Questions from the audience? Yes? Great question. The length. How long does it take to write a Sefer Torah?
That a lot depends on the person's individual ability to write, in terms of how fast he writes. But the average Sofer, if he would, a regular work week of, let's say, 40 hours a week, he could do it somewhere between 9 and 12 months.
What do you think?
What's that?
So the question was good. The question was, you'll see here that, again, the parchment is also sewn together. So the question was, does the Sefer Torah have to be written by the same scribe, or can a scribe say, all right, Bereshis, you write Shmot, return to me for Vayikra, then you'll do Bamidbar and Devarim, right? So, I'll take a few, you'll take a few. Rabbi Asa, can it be broken up that way?
Yes, so technically the answer is yes, but it does definitely detract from the beauty of it, because each scribe obviously is going to have a slightly different variation in his how the letters are going to look. So, one may be a little bit more artistic, one may have a little bit sharper letters. And so when you have different scribes in the same Torah, it's definitely noticeable that it changes, and it just sort of, it's a little bit, takes away from the beauty of the whole Torah.
Questions from the, if we have anyone on YouTube, please, we're interactive. You could write in and you can let us know that if you have questions, we will answer them. What about here? So one of the commandments is that we all have to write our own Sefer Torah. So maybe we say, well, we don't have the ability to write our own Sefer Torah, so we're going to, we have a Sofer here. We want to hire the Sofer to write a Sefer Torah, but this is big. We want a much smaller Sefer Torah, or maybe we want a much larger Sefer Torah. Rabbi Asa, can you talk to us about sizes? Are some very small? Are some very large? Have you been contracted ever to write such a Sefer Torah?
So there definitely is a big variation in terms of size. There's no real exact tradition of the height of the Torah or the length of the Torah. There are some different customs in terms of the number of lines, ranging from somewhere 32 up to somewhere either 50 or 60. But those are sort of things that will vary from Torah to Torah. Today, many of the Torahs have become sort of standardized, even to the extent of which letter will start each column.
Wow!
So that it makes it easier for the bar mitzvah boys to make sure that they find their place easily.
Or for us, our B'nai Mitzvah students, right? They're coming up soon. We have a bar mitzvah coming up next Shabbos. Then we have our B'nai Mitzvah. So we've got all kinds of things. And so the rabbi's saying it makes it easier with the letters. We know what letters they're using for what columns. So is this an Ashken? When we talk about this, kind of types of Jewish individuals, we maybe say Mizrahi Jews or Ashkenazi Jews or Sephardi Jews. What type of Sefer Torah is this? And what is the difference between Sifrei Torahs?
Okay, so just like in a computer, there are different types of fonts. Within Jewish tradition, there are very slight variations between what the rabbi mentioned between Ashkenazic and Sephardic fonts, and even within Ashkenazic, there are at least two different, or maybe three different customs, and very, very slight variations in terms of the shapes of the letters, though that the actual Torah is identical. There are slightly, the shapes of the letters can have slight variations. I don't know if that answered the question fully.
Yes, right, so the shapes. And now again, we have here, when we adorn the Torah, we have a crown. This Torah we're laying down. Has anyone ever seen a Torah that's read from a standing position? Have you ever seen that before? The case, it stands up. Rabbi Asa, have you ever worked on a Torah that actually is standing up?
The answer is yes. I've worked on it, but not standing. When I had taken it out of its case. Yes. So the Sephardic tradition is indeed to use they have usually a wooden case or a silver case that surrounds the entire Torah, and they have, without the bottom and top, they just have two wooden dowels that they connect the Torah to, and then they place it inside this case, and as they need to roll it inside the case, it just kind of rolls along those dowels. And that is the Sephardic tradition to make the Torahs standing up.
Who knew it could be so complicated? What do you think? It's pretty complex. It's not so simple. So questions, comments from YouTube, if you have, you can write in.
What I'm doing now is, this is parchment with a sticky backing to it, and it's just in order to reinforce the connection. After I've sewn it on, I'm going to put this piece of parchment, two pieces of parchment, just to give a little bit more of reinforcement, and that will make sure that it stays on really nicely.
Now, the Rav, Rabbi Asa, said that it needs to be parchment from a kosher animal, and we learned, again, not long ago, we learned about the two simanim, right, the two symbols for a kosher animal. For the land animal, do you remember what they were? Has to have a split hoof and chew its cud. So what type of animal could we use for this?
At this point, we're going to start rolling. This is the most time-consuming because we have to go from one end to the other.
Okay, well, while you're rolling, I have a question. What is the sticky substance that you were using on that piece of parchment to reinforce it?
It's some type of a kosher sticky glue. Not made by Johnson & Johnson.
Okay, that was a real technical answer. I appreciate that.
If you want me to come over there also, let me know.
Okay.
You can switch it up a little bit, so save your forearms.
I'm going to just take a break for a second.
Sure.
And take off. All right, it's getting warm in here.
So why do we have, again, so how would we know where we are? What about, when you think about the Sefer Torah, where Rabbi Asa, where are the chapters and verses? When someone says, point to, here, this Shabbos, we have a double feature this Shabbos, we're talking about the holiness code. What if we say, what chapter and verse are we in? How does a person know?
Yeah, so actually, interestingly enough, what we call the chapters and verses, like chapter 22 of Genesis, verse 7, was actually invented by Christian scholars sometime in the Middle Ages. And for whatever reason, it became sort of standard to use that same divisions when we have our printed books. But the divisions of the Torah, where you find spaces between the paragraphs, is actually very different than chapter and verses of what is printed. Here's just a place where we finish the book of Genesis and starting the book of Exodus. There's always a 4-line break between one and the other. That way you know you're at the end of the book. But in terms of where you are in the particular book, you just kind of have to know your way around, because there are no other markings to show, you are at a certain place. So you just have to know it. One thing I will mention about this particular Torah is that it is not, as opposed to almost all Torahs that are written today, where the first letter in each column is the letter Vav, what's called the Vav HaChibur, the connecting Vav. This particular Torah, which means it probably has some age to it, was not written that way. There's no law that it has to be written that way, but it is common custom today that all Torahs are written. The first letter in the Torah is in each column is a Vav.
That might make it easier to cue it up, as we say.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a question from Andrew. He is asking, how often does this need to be done?
Repeat the question.
How often does switching out the Eitzei Chayim or the rolling?
I'm assuming it's switching out.
How often is it necessary to switch out the Eitzei Chayim?
Right. As often, as needed. If the wood is no longer holding in place, then they start falling apart. Or if you have a termite infestation, then at that point you switch out the wood. But most Eitzei Chayim will last for many decades, assuming that everyone takes good care of it.
Andrew, great question. The reason why I asked about the rolling, because maybe Rabbi Asa can talk to us about, maybe if you have a Torah that is just left maybe in a museum that for decades has never been rolled, is there issues with that, Rabbi Asa?
The rabbis did encourage that books the handwritten scrolls should be rolled regularly, once a month. Not from beginning to end necessarily, but opened up and aired out, because when they're left to be, inevitably moisture will collect and will cause some damage. So that actually rolling it is actually very healthy for the well-being of the Torah. Okay.
How does one become a Sofer?
So, practice.
Lots of practice.
When I was living in Israel, I had the opportunity, I had two close friends who were both scribes, Sofrim, and I spent quite a bit of time with them getting practical, hands-on training. And then I actually ended up spending 2 summers in New York after I moved back to the States to actually get certified as a scribe. But it's a matter of finding someone to train you and then practicing a lot. How are we doing there?
Doing well.
Okay. So here we come to the end of another book.
So now we're in the final Devarim. So, right, Breshit, Shemot, Vayikra, Bamidbar. This is it. This is the last book. Are we ready? And what do we do when we finish the last book? That's right. We re-roll the whole thing and start back in Bereshit.
So you can hear, as the Torah is being unrolled, you hear a little bit of it.
You hear
it's
the
sticking. So that means it probably has been a while since it has been unrolled. At least that part of the Torah. Okay.
Okay, we have another question asking if Rabbi Asa, if this is done at Chabad's as well.
If this is done at?
Chabad's.
What specifically, if what is done?
That's all the information I have. Hopefully I can get a little more clarification.
The short answer is yes. In other words, any synagogue that's using the Torah scroll, with time, certain things need to be repaired, if the handles need to be fixed. So that would all be done. I don't know of any difference anywhere.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's go ahead and. If it's not along the part where the lettering is, so we just patch it. If it's where the lettering is, then it becomes a little bit more complicated.
Great question. It was about what if it tears? So here, what if it tears, or what if when the Sofer, what if all of a sudden Rav Asa is very tired and makes a mistake on one of the letters? So what do we do? Because we know it's written in ink. Is there a special eraser that you use?
So first you let the ink dry. We're going to put this over here, yeah.
So first you have to let it dry, knowing that you've made the mistake. So first you let it dry, and then is there a tool that you use to remove?
Right. Usually a surgical knife, a curved surgical knife, very sharp and very gently scraped out the ink, and then an artist's chalk to smooth it back out, and sometimes a little bit of sandpaper.
Now that's a mistake. So what happens if a mistake is made on one of the names of Hashem?
Yeah. So then.
So what is that the same? Is that the same halacha of just you scrape it out and then you rewrite it?
Right. So it really depends where you are in the name of God, but sometimes you can fix it, and sometimes you actually have to. That section would actually have to be replaced.
So think about that. Maybe you've written the whole column. In the last section, you have one of God's names. We know Hashem has many names. You make a mistake on that name, and now all of a sudden the Sofer is saying he might have to write the whole section again. So how focused then are you when you're writing? Maybe when you're writing that name, do you get extra focus?
Every name you get extra focus.
Every name you get extra focus.
How many sections are there? I mean, it can vary from Torah to Torah, but I want to say somewhere between 50 and 60, approximately. I should know this, but I don't know the exact count. So here we want to make sure it lines up so that when it gets rolled, it's a good fit.
And now we have in these new Eitzei Chayim, these new scrolls. Again, they have that new piece, so it's going to line it up. It's going to be more of a tighter fit, which I think also is beneficial for the parchment.
Absolutely, yes.
Right, because then the air is not going to get into the parchment as frequently. Who wants to sign up and be an understudy? Who wants to? And Rav Asa, are you taking? If we want to learn by you. That's a good question, but what about anyone that has the ability? Now, when you start to practice, what's one of the first things that you practice? Let's say when you have, so Rabbi Asa, as I mentioned, he was living in Eretz Yisrael, and he met some friends that were Sofrim, and he wanted to start to study. What's kind of one of the first things that you write that you study with? Let's see if maybe our congregants know what that is. What's one of the first things that a Sofer starts to study with?
Give you a hint. It's one of the books that does not have God's name in it.
Does anybody know?
What's that?
What's a holiday? What's a holiday where we get dressed up? Uppa, good job. One of the things that we practice is the scroll of Esther. And Rabbi Asa is saying why? Because in the scroll of Esther, Hashem, God's name, is not written in the scroll. And remember, when we talk about the scroll of Esther, traditionally it's like a big letter, if you will, a scroll, like a Megillah, right? That's a Megillat Esther, that you unroll it, you unravel it. So that's one of the first things that I guess the Soferim practice on.
Correct, right. And that way, if you make a mistake, you're not involving God's name, and it's much easier to correct it. Another interesting thing is that a Megillah and a Torah scroll do not have to be written in order. In other words, you could start at the end of the Torah and actually write to the beginning, if you would like, which is especially advantageous for a right-handed person. He could start at the end of the line and actually write backwards, as opposed to the mezuzah or the tefillin actually every letter has to be written in order, and if it's out of order, it actually invalidates it. Which is one of the reasons why a Torah scroll can be fixed, a Megillah can be fixed, but a mezuzah or a tefillin actually cannot be fixed, because then it would be out of order.
Now, when we write, think about that. When Rabbi Asa writes tefillin or writes a mezuzah, right, the cloth inside the mezuzah, is that a bigger piece, a smaller piece? When you write inside a mezuzah, is it just the Shema? Is it multiple blessings? When you write inside the mezuzah, what blessings are written inside of these items that we use for prayer?
You want me to answer that?
Yes.
Okay. I thought your congregation could answer that.
Okay. So we have the Shema and the blessings associated with the Shema. And what about when you're writing in let's say, tefillin? Is it written on one parchment? How does that work? Let's say if we need Rabbi Asa to write tefillin, does he just get 2 pieces of paper? Rabbi Asa, how do you write tefillin? Is it just, because we know we have a head tefillin and then a tefillin on our arm, right? Is it just 1 piece of paper for each one?
Right. So if you ever look at the tefillin from the outside, you will see that the head tefillin actually has 4 separate compartments, and the arm tefillin is just 1 large compartment. And inside, indeed, there's 1 compartment and 4 compartments, and that is the head tefillin would actually, the 4 paragraphs of the tefillin would be actually written in 4 separate compartments and then put inside. But on the arm tefillin, it's all 4 of them are written on 1 long parchment.
So think about that. What the Sofer is saying is you had 4 blessings on 4 separate sheets of cloth. Is that easy to do? How is that? Is that easy to do?
I had a 7th grade teacher, a Jamaican woman, a wonderful teacher, one of the best teachers I ever had, and she used to tell us, once you know how to do it, it's real easy.
Once you know how to do it, it's real easy. Now, what about when you're we have a question from YouTube.
We have a question from our remote audience. What about the very fragile Holocaust Torah? How does that need to be maintained?
I'm going to defer to the rabbi on that one.
So the Holocaust Torah that we have, it's a great question. How is it maintained? So right now we really use it as a teaching tool. So we're not actually using it. It's when we say a kosher, as the Sofer mentioned, what's a kosher Torah? What can invalidate it? One, we know it has to be, as the rabbi said, it has to be written with this purpose. So ours, we know, is written that way. But we're not exactly sure because we don't use it so much. So it's taken out of circulation, and it's actually here. I don't know if you can see it from our camera, but we have it here on our wall as a display. So it's not actually kept in the Aron HaKodesh, in the Holy Ark.
Just as a historical background, so the Nazis, may their name be erased, actually collected hundreds of Torah scrolls and other Jewish artifacts and stored them in Prague, in Czechoslovakia, with the intent of making a museum to the extinct race. And as a result, after the Holocaust, there were hundreds of Torah scrolls and other Jewish artifacts from all of these various communities throughout the Europe that were rescued and actually brought to England. And a Sofer spent something like 20 or 30 years working on many of these Torahs, The ones that were restorable, he actually restored, and the other ones, I think, were just donated to various synagogues throughout the world.
And our Torah, didn't someone from our congregation go to England? Or go and pick up the Holocaust Torah? Right, it was sent to us. But didn't Don pick it up? That's right, he went to the airport to pick it up. So when we travel with a Sefer Torah, you don't check it. Right? You can't check a Sefer Torah. I've been blessed. One time someone asked me to transport a Sefer Torah to New York. And in the airport, I was walking. Wherever I walked with the Sefer Torah, holding it the entire way, all the way to New York. You can't check a Sefer Torah. You go through, you don't put it down, right? You walk with it.
Yeah. Remind me of a story. I was once, it wasn't long after 9/11, I was going through the airport, and they started going through my things in my hand luggage, and I guess the guy had never seen it. I don't remember where the airport was, but he saw my tefillin, and he asked me, I started looking at them. I says, "What are these?" So I just looked at them and said, "Those are my phylacteries." And he kind of gave me a look, and he said, "Oh, okay, fine, have a nice day."
I don't think anyone knows what that word is in English.
It's a Greek word which means something, but that's what it is. Okay.
Now, what about, we have, again, when we think about things that are written, we mentioned earlier we have the Sefer Torah, we have, right, the word stam, this acronym, tefillin and mezuzot. But also there are two other items, one that we shouldn't know from, but one also, when we get married, we have a ketubah. Have you been contracted to write ketubot?
I do. I have written some. There are a lot less, let's say, restrictions or guidelines for writing the ketubah, and the exactness of the letters or things like that. There's really, it's just basically a document stating that this couple, is married and what the obligations are. So there's a lot less restrictions or guidelines. But I have written a few ketubas over the years.
And the other one that I say we shouldn't know from, but it happens, is the get. Also, that's handwritten. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is, and there are some very particular, laws regarding that. Do you want to leave it here? Or do you want to roll it to?
We'll leave it there. That's fine.
Okay.
We'll leave it there. So now we have to put on the gartel, the belt. So now we're going to put on, right? So why do we have all these items? When we dress the Torah, why do we have all these items that we dress the Torah with? Anyone in the audience, what do you think?
Probably wants to go back to like the times of the temple, with like the high priest and the different ornaments that the...
Right, the ornaments, that's right.
And since we don't have a priest, we've got Torah, and that's kind of the third placement of the priest, maybe, I don't know.
Well, also we spoke about this, I think, maybe even today we spoke about that.
You want to put it back in the ark?
Yeah, I'll put it back in the ark.
Okay.
So we spoke about the Hidor mitzvah, right? We want to make sure it's beautiful. And what do you think about the new Eitzei Chayim? Look how gorgeous, right? All right, and now this is the Torah that we use on Shabbos. And you'll see it's a little more worn, which is a good thing, right? You want to see a Torah that has some use.
Okay. Let's see, we're closer to...
Probably.
So we'll probably go this end. Okay. Yeah. I don't know if you can see from there, but if you look at the back of the parchment, it's sort of very, very shiny. So they actually coat the back of the parchment back in the day, and it was a certain chemical that would keep rodents from eating away at the parchment. I recently, it was about a year ago, had a Torah was brought to me. It was a newer Torah, but it had been stored in a house that was unoccupied for about half a year, and it did not have that backing. And sure enough, some rodents got into the house, and they ate through. It was unfortunately we had to replace about 10 or 20 columns that had just been eaten through. That nothing we could do about it. It was quite a job.
Now, when we think about the Sefer Torah, you go, wow, these are a lot of letters. So, when I have a question for our Sofer here, when you're writing the Sefer Torah, do you say, well, I've done this many times and I'm trained. I've memorized the whole Torah. I'm going to write it from memory.
Right. So the Torah, every Torah is copied either from another Torah or from a exact text of a copy of a Torah to make sure that no mistakes would crop in. As I'm looking, I just want to point out, so this Torah actually, you'll notice, if you have ever a chance, that every single column is starting with the letter Vav. And that is the more traditional way to do it, but it doesn't invalidate if it's not done that way.
Why the letter Vav and not any other letter of the alphabet?
Very good question. So one possible idea is the Vav means, in translated into English, is and. So that when you come to the end of a column, the end of a book, don't think that you're at the end. It continues the next column. It continues. It's all one continuous story. Okay. These have 4 columns. This is 4 columns. These are all 4 columns. This writing is a little bit smaller than the other one, so you're going to need less parchment. But usually it's between 3 and 5 columns per section. So this last one has 1, 2, 3, 4 also. Even though these are half columns, they're really full columns. But that's kind of standard, just between 3 and 5. Okay, I'll grab it from there. Perfect. Okay. Oh, let's grab this here.
So who wants Rabbi Asa to come back and do a Sofer course?
Is this a Torah that was donated by who got it from the Temple Beth in New York?
That is a question to maybe our president.
What?
Is this Torah? Is this Torah? Was this the one that was donated from a community in New York? Was there a Torah that was donated to us?
I think it's the big one.
It's the big one? Okay, so it's the other Torah. So where does anyone know where we acquired this Torah? We'll have to put out an APB and ask people out. Where is this Torah? Where did it come from?
I know one was purchased, but I don't remember where from.
One was?
Purchased.
Purchased. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
So with the Holocaust Torah, it's Bobby and I have done it now, I think once or twice, where we probably need to put it on a schedule to roll it more frequently. There's a light also on it, but the light's not on. But again, our building, since we've been closed, so people aren't really looking at it. But it is something that we'll probably spend more time rolling it. Maybe to the week up, and now the light is on, so now we can see it.
That one came from Brunel.
Brunel? Is that
Wow.
Oh, I've seen another Holocaust Torah from
That's
Brunel.
beautiful.
It's very interesting.
That's incredible. Wow.
Uh-huh. But now it's Czechoslovakia, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Wow.
I think
Yeah,
so.
Czechoslovakia. It's amazing. Beautiful.
So we want to line things up here.
So what makes, when you think about we're in a sanctuary, what makes a sanctuary holy? So let's say if all of a sudden, if we remove some items from this sanctuary, would it still be a sanctuary? Or if we wanted to daven, if we wanted to pray in a new space, what would we need in order to make that space holy? Rabbi Asa, can you tell us if all of a sudden we wanted to maybe go into the social hall and have services in the social hall and turn that space into sacred space, what item would we need?
And yeah, interesting. So, technically a sanctuary, even in its destruction, retains its sanctity as a sanctuary, whether it be the temple in Jerusalem or even our synagogues. If it is, God forbid, destroyed somehow, it still actually retains its sanctity. And to create a new space, you really have to designate it that's its exclusive use. And so if we can pray anywhere, obviously, in our homes and in a social hall, whatever, but it doesn't give us the status of a sanctuary until it's designated for that exclusive purpose. And then obviously the ark and the Torah scrolls and anything else accompanying it would go along with it. Did that answer the question, Rabbi?
Yeah, I think it answered the question. The idea is it's a difficult question because there's a lot of mixed use spaces. So Rabbi Asa is saying that you really need to designate this as a holy space, but what if we say, well, this is our sanctuary plus our social activities, and we've got the kitchen here as well, and we kind of use this one space for everything. How do we do that?
Right, so that it doesn't get the status of a sanctuary. It's a place where people are using for prayer, which is acceptable. It just doesn't have the same status.
Okay, and can we take one of the old Eitzei Chayim and put it horizontally to where Rabbi Asa is working, so the people watching can see why we are going through this exercise? Okay, turn it 90 degrees, Bobby, so that the... Wonderful, thank you. And as you can see, there is a ring of worn wood around that, Bobby, or Rabbi, if you could point to it. So that's why we're going through this exercise. I wanted everybody to know that we just didn't do that just for grins and giggles.
And the reason probably get worn there is probably there's a crown that goes on top, and as it gets moved, the crown rubs against the wood, and with time it somewhat deteriorates the wood.
Rabbi, that generates another question. This is the old piece. Is there a procedure for destroying it?
So if it cannot be repurposed, then it should be buried, just like anything else that was used for a holy purpose. Yeah, I mean, we certainly try to repurpose for another Torah that's going to be donated somewhere, or maybe get it fixed up a little bit and reuse it. That would obviously be the ideal thing.
If anyone is watching or anyone in here, we could repurpose this for an incredible Megillah. So Temple Beth David is in need of a Megillah, which we do not have. So we have Eitzei Chayim now, and we just need the Megillah.
I think that would be a very, very big Megillah.
That's the Ganza Megillah. And how many Torahs, a question is, how many Torahs should a sanctuary really have? What is there a minimum that a sanctuary should have, and is there a maximum? When you think, 'cause sometimes you might be at a shul, and they open the Holy Ark, and you might see 2, and you might see 8. Right? There's some shuls where you open them up and they have them even elevated or off to the sides. So, Rabbi, can you explain share with us? Is there a minimum and is there a maximum number?
Right. The minimum is really 1, obviously. The reason why synagogues tend to have more than 1, besides the fact that there's donors that want to donate them. The other reason would be because there are certain times of the year where we read from 2 separate Torahs or even 3 separate Torahs on certain days of the year, and it would be a big inconvenience for the congregation to wait and have to roll the Torah to the right spot, and therefore, 3 is kind of the standard for many congregations. In addition, the bigger congregations sometimes have a youth minyan and an early minyan, a late minyan, services, at different times of the day, so that they might want to have more than a few Torahs available for the different services.
And now, when you're reading the Torah, when it's open, do you just sight read the Torah, or do you put your finger over on top of the letters? Can you share with us how one reads the Torah? Do you need something to read the Torah? And if so, how do you use it?
Right. So I'm actually not a Torah reader. I don't have a musical ear at all. That was gifted to me by my forebears. But one who is reading the Torah usually uses what's called a yad. Literally means a hand, but it's usually a wooden or a metal, silver something type of a pointer, being very careful actually not to touch the letters, but just to go just above the letters, so he himself will not lose the place, and the other person that's called up to the Torah will also not lose to follow along as the reader is reading. But that's being said, if you don't have one, it's just more of a convenience than anything else.
Now, traditionally, maybe at some shuls you might have, as the Rabbi Asa is saying, that you have this Baal Koreh, this leader, this master of reading. Do they have to read the whole? Do they switch out? Or do they read the whole aliyah when they're reading?
So most synagogues have one person that sort of reads that week, but there definitely are synagogues where, one person will read one aliyah, and then, another person might do a different aliyah, and that way he doesn't, no one person has to have the whole, let's go ahead and start there, has to have, and just as you're going, just try to keep it as evenly on the parchment as possible. Has to, be reading the entire Torah portion that week.
Does anyone want to sign up to read the whole Torah portion this week? We have a double feature. And Larry, just feel free to ask any questions. We're kind of, whatever questions you have, there is no need to write them down.
I'm breathing. We got 7 people on that. The hardest part is keeping him near the mic, because people out there cannot hear.
I'm having a hard time hearing. Say it again. Right?
Yes, please, what? Hurry.
Any Sofer could change it. You mean like fixing it or something? Yeah. So really, anyone who knows
I'm a mind
what to do can do it.
I can translate.
Sometimes, because the fonts are slightly different, if you have to rewrite some of the letters, you have to be familiar with that font and try to match it as much as possible. So that is, it's not always so easy to get it to look. Yeah, you could always, as long as the parchment is still holding the ink and is not, disintegrating, you can. Now, that being said, there comes a time where parchment a lot of the letters are already flaking, and it becomes very, very challenging to fix it, and it's not going to last a long time. So at that point, usually the Torah scroll is buried.
Do you have to bury the whole scroll, or can you just get that one section?
So it really depends how extensive the deterioration is. In other words, if it's just one section, then obviously you try to save whatever you can. But sometimes a whole entire scroll is just so old and so damaged or whatever that the whole thing has to be buried. Right. Right. Yeah. So, just like any important document that we hold dear, so when it gets copied, we want to make sure that that it is done accurately. If you sometimes you're in a synagogue and someone is the reader is reading. And if he makes a mistake on the word, people will correct him because we want to make sure that the exact tradition is passed down and that no mistakes creep in. So that is it only sort of thank you. It only sort of speaks to the fact that how important this document was for the Jewish people in our history. We are almost there. Okay. Whoop, slowly. Okay. Perfect. Okay. All right. So, yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. So, as I mentioned, there's sometimes slightly different fonts. So this particular font is called the Ari. The Ari was a Kabbalist in the 1600s in Tzfat, in Israel, and he had certain traditions about certain of the letters, the way they were supposed to be written, and many Hasidic Jews and certain other ones follow that tradition, and certain of those letters, and so, not all the letters are different, but certain letters are different. And this particular Torah is written in that tradition.
Okay, Rabbi Asa, we have a Stump the Rabbi question.
Oh, okay.
One of our members visited a synagogue in New York where there were 20 to 30 scrolls, and she believes that they were stored there during World War II. She's asking if you know of this synagogue, and she thinks maybe it was the 16th Street Synagogue.
I am not familiar with it.
Okay, wait a minute. Get back to the mic before you keep answering.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So I'm not particularly familiar with it. And I'm just wondering, so they were restored during World War II? Is that what she said?
That they were stored there.
They were stored there during World War II. I'm not familiar with it. I'd be interested in finding out more. Okay. We're going to line this up so it fits. Okay, beautiful.
when you want to practice or you're writing a Sefer Torah for the parchment, is there a special place that you order the parchment from? Do you go to, maybe we're in Gwinnett County, there's some rural areas with some farm country. Where does one get the parchment?
Right. So besides the requirement that it be from a kosher animal, interestingly enough, only a kosher species of animal, it actually doesn't have to be from a slaughtered animal. So if one would go to just to a regular slaughterhouse or farm or whatever and get hides of some animals that were not ritually slaughtered, it would still be acceptable to use. However, it would have to be processed in a very specific way, and that is sort of an industry into itself. And almost all of those parchments are processed today in Israel, though I think a lot of the actual parchment itself comes from South America and is imported to Israel because they just don't have enough cattle in Israel to produce that amount of parchment that's needed.
Well, Argentina is a good place for that.
Not only that, a lot of the kosher meat that comes to Israel also comes from South America. Though I understand that in the last 12 months it has been somewhat of a challenge.
Have you heard about, this is a question, let's see, if someone maybe doesn't want to use animal products for a Sefer Torah, how would one write a Sefer Torah? Is that a possibility? Have you heard of such a thing?
Yeah, I have not heard of such a thing. In Jewish tradition, it's pretty clear that it does need to be from a kosher animal. So I don't know what the vegans of the world would do, but both tefillin, the mezuzahs, Torahs, all of them do come from the hides of animals.
But as Rabbi Asa said, again, that the animal itself, as he mentioned earlier, that it has to have the ability to be a kosher animal, but it's not the shechita, the shechting of the animal, it's not done for a ritual slaughtering purpose. So as a cow, if a cow died in another way, that hide of the cow could be used. It wouldn't need, a shochet does not need to kill the cow in order for it to be used for a Sefer Torah.
Right, that's correct. Even though most of our Torahs today are written on calf or maybe occasionally sheepskin, but up until, maybe 50, 60 years ago, a lot of the Sephardic Torah scrolls, the ones that are written like in the Middle East, were written actually on gazelle or deerskin, which obviously is a kosher animal. And you still find them in circulation. It's a much softer leather, a much lighter leather actually. However, the disadvantage is with time, the skin gets very, very dark. It turns like a reddish brown. It gets darker with time and it becomes very hard to read from it.
Wow.
So I think that's a reason why it became less popular to use.
And I think one of the questions from our audience here is this this Sefer Torah here, we're in Snellville in Gwinnett County. And all of a sudden, if Rabbi Asa, if you needed to go to Montreal, or if you needed to go to Mexico City or Sao Paulo to work with the Sefer Torah, would it be the same Sefer Torah?
Excellent question. The short answer is yes, and maybe not.
That's the Jewish answer.
That's right. So there is one letter, believe it or not, between a Sephardic scroll and an Ashkenazic scroll. There is one letter which doesn't change the meaning. It's the only time this particular word appears in the Torah, it's a question of whether that letter ends with a hey or ends with an aleph. The Ashkenazic custom is to write it with an aleph, and the Sephardic custom is to write it with a hey. And that is the only difference you should find between the two Torah scrolls.
And you're saying there'd be issues if we found something else.
Correct, right. Now, interestingly enough, Not necessarily. So if a gross error was found in a Torah scroll, let's say a word is missing or something, then the Torah actually is put back in the ark, and then after Shabbat, it would be fixed. But if certain other things are missing, for instance, there are certain words that could be written with a yud or without a yud, or with a vav or without a vav, what's called chaser maleh. And because we somewhat lost the tradition about certain words, that even though we have a tradition how we're supposed to write it, we're not 100% sure. And if we would find it, let's say, missing that vav, and it's according to, we actually don't put the Torah scroll away. We continue reading it. And that we do fix it eventually, but we wouldn't have to put the Torah scroll away.
So what Rabbi Asa is saying, so when you look in the Chumash, you'll see Ketiv Maleh, which means that you'll see the whole word spelled out. Okay? So it makes it's easier to pronounce when you see all of the letters. So if you sometimes, maybe we'll call it like shorthand, that when you write something, you'll leave out something where you know, the ones that know, but, if you're kind of, if it's your first glance, you'll see in parentheses kind of the whole word spelled out.
Correct. Okay. All right.
You excited to see the Sefer Torah in action?
Okay, Rabbi Google found an answer to the shul question in New York.
Okay, let's hear.
Orchard Street Shul.
Okay, and what is the history of the Torahs?
Okay, Sandy, you've got another assignment.
Now I know here in Georgia we have the third oldest. I think it's the third oldest shul in Savannah. And Savannah, if you go to the shul there, the Reform shul, they have upstairs. They have a museum, and they have a Sefer Torah in their museum. And I want to say it's the second or third Sefer Torah that came to our shores here in North America.
Right. It was brought over by Spanish, Portuguese Jews. I've actually examined that Torah. So it's at least from the 1600s. And it actually is written on gazelle.
Right. It's because it's darker. That's why I noticed that. Yeah, I was thinking
dark.
about that when you said that. It's darker.
Yes. Okay. Beautiful. We have a Torah scroll. Okay. Nice and tight there. Looks beautiful. But as it says in the sages, don't look at the container. Don't only look at the container, but look at what's written in it. So obviously the Eitzei Chayim are beautiful and important, but the main thing is the script itself, the writing and the meaning. Okay. Wonder if there's any indication of who donated this, just as a memory of loved ones. Nope, that's all that's about it. Okay. Okay. Any other questions I can address?
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I want to thank Rabbi Asa for coming and with his sharing with us so much information. Thank all of you and to our president, whoever, all of us working together with these new Eitzei Chayim. It's incredible. It's beautiful. And thank you to our Chazan, Barry, for putting together the Aron HaKodesh, where now the Torahs are standing up against, they're no longer leaning against the wall, that they are upright. And it's incredible. So we want to say Toda Rabbah. Thank you to Rabbi Asa, our Sofer. Thank you to everyone watching on YouTube and asking such important questions. And again, if we have from our audience, if people say we would like to bring Rabbi Asa back, maybe to teach us a little calligraphy, a little, to bring the safras, the ink, and to maybe we'll make our some type of utensil to use to write a letter. We could write maybe Aleph. So only blessings. Thank you so much. Sei gesund and an early Shabbat Shalom from Temple Beth David.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.